Hello, Sunday school teachers. So we move back to the New Testament this week. I know we're kind of pinballing back and forth here. We were just dealing with the end of Genesis and then the beginning of the book of Exodus, and we don't want our young people to get whiplash, but helpful to establish for them that now we're moving to a different part of the Bible, just so they don't get confused in the chronology and the timeline here. And you can share with them the reason we're moving to a different part of the Bible now is because of the time of year that we are having. We got a new month here, we got April, but more to the point, we are in the Lenten season and we're coming up on Holy Week. It wouldn't be a bad idea to teach the kids what Lent means. You know, Lent is a season in the church year when we reflect on Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Now, at the risk of getting more confusing, the chronology over the next couple of weeks is going to be a little unusual too. I thought it best to have the Palm Sunday lesson on Palm Sunday. So we will next week go to Palm Sunday. This week we have Jesus on the cross. So we have Jesus on the cross, then we're going to have Jesus on a donkey next week, and then the next week is Easter. And then the next week, I think we've got the death of Jesus again, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, it's just going to be helpful to kind of hold the kids' hand here. I mean, if they're used to watching TV shows that kind of have different chronologies, well, hopefully this won't be too jarring for them. But your role will be helpful too in terms of helping them picture the big picture and where we are situated. So today again, this week the lesson is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, a passion account of the crucifixion. And my goodness, you just go verse by verse through this, and you have a whole lesson contained in each verse. It's really amazing. You've got the statement, Jesus calling down forgiveness for his tormentors. You've got the dividing the garments. You've got the crowd mocking him. But ultimately, the main point of the story you guys have this week is Jesus's interaction with the men on the cross who are crucified next to him, and the mercy that Jesus shows a repentant sinner who is being executed, and the message of hope that Jesus has for this repentant sinner. So let's delve into it a little bit. I'm going to give a whole bunch of background that may or may not be useful for you in terms of what you talk to the kids about, but I think it will be helpful for you in terms of getting the big picture here. I would commend for you, if you haven't, if you weren't able to come to church Wednesday or didn't see the live stream, Wednesday evening, the topic was mercy in relationships, and it goes really well with this Sunday's lesson. I notice it's actually not up on the website yet, but if you go to the church YouTube page, you can find the service, and of course it's got the whole service there. You'll have to kind of fast forward to get to the sermon, but I'd commend that to your attention. It's potentially helpful lesson about and I do draw from some of the imagery here in Luke 23, some of what Jesus dealt with in his crucifixion, in terms of thinking through what our relationships look like with other people. So delving into this, we have Jesus next week when we get to Palm Sunday will be met with adoring crowds. He very much has the opposite experience here. It's kind of one of those like platitudes that you hear on Holy Week, like those same people that were cheering him on Palm Sunday were saying crucify him on Thursday and Friday. I don't think that was actually the case. I think it's a different group of people. I think that this group that's yelling at him and reviling him are people who the mob that the chief priests and the teachers of the law have cooked up. It's they didn't have social media back then to rally people, but they had ways to get the word out and say, we need you to appear at the governor's house, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is an anti-Jesus crowd that's been raised up by his enemies and his opponents. They were incited in order to get him crucified, but now that he is being crucified, they're hanging around for the action. Of course, crucifixion was intended to be public so that it was a deterrent against rebelling against the Roman Empire. Not that Jesus wanted to rebel against the Roman Empire, but that was the idea behind crucifixion. And so you had a public spectacle. And so you have this crowd here, and they're mocking him and reviling him. Which, boy, if anyone has ever dealt with shame, a sense of public scorn, what Jesus goes through here is pretty powerful. The fact that he does this on our behalf, and if you have faith in him, if you're willing to let him, he will take your shame, replace your shame with his shame, and ultimately with his glory. So Jesus is being publicly humiliated here. He's being mocked. And of course, his reaction famously is, "Father, forgive them." This is helpful on two levels. One, when we realize our complicity in Jesus' death, it's our sin that's putting him there. The fact that he is calling down forgiveness is our forgiveness too. So that's very helpful to remember, that we are being blessed here in this moment on the cross. And of course, the other application is for those who torment us. St. Stephen is a great example of this. As he is being killed, he is calling down forgiveness upon his tormentors and his murderers. That doesn't mean you have to tell lies about people when they're being mean. Stephen was, the reason he was getting stoned to death was because he was rather vocal in his criticism of the religious leaders. But then once he was being stoned to death, he was calling down forgiveness upon them. So Jesus himself, he was pretty bluntly honest with the teachers of the law, and yet he was calling down forgiveness in his final moments. So now let's talk about these thieves. And yeah, I'm going to challenge some of the conventional wisdom a little bit. The Holy Week stories are some of the better known in the entire Bible, which is great. The problem with well-known stories sometimes is there's a drift away from what the text actually says. And then there's also, in our tradition, we see this with the Christmas stories too. Some of the earlier translations into English became kind of formative, like in the Christmas story, when we hear about there being no room at the inn. And so we picture a hotel, and then we realize now, like, that has no relation to what Mary and Joseph are going through. Check the Christmas videos if you need a primer on that. But our situation today with these two thieves. Now, the Greek word is lambano. Can it be translated thief? Absolutely. These guys could be thieves. But it's not like these guys were like petty, like they're not going into a grocery store and making off with merchandise here. You know, they're not shoplifters. If they are thieves, it's a pretty serious kind of thievery that's going on. It's highway robbery would be the kind of thievery which often resulted in murder as well. But what's most likely here for a translation of Labano could be insurrectionist. Yeah, that's always been a thing. People who are seeking to overthrow the established rulers and authorities. And so most likely these are rebels against the Roman Empire, and most likely kind of Jewish desperado, zealot, people who are willing to engage in violence. You know, that's likely what these two guys are. These violent, revolutionary, likely murderers, possibly murderers. I mean, we know Barabbas was a murderer. As far as these two guys, I guess what we know is they're lambanos. They're bad guys. This is something we know. And of course, we have the famous one on his right, one on his left. One who is cursing Jesus and mocking him. The other one who is pleading for forgiveness. And one of the problems with understanding this is if you go look at other gospel accounts, they talk about, I think it's Mark, that talks about all the people being crucified with him, mocking him. So how do we square that? I mean, one thing we could say, well, there's just contradictions in the Bible. And of course, we know the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. So that explanation isn't going to be helpful for us. Here's my theory, which, I mean, it's not mine alone, but it seems pretty obvious to me, is at one time both of these robbers, thieves, murderers, lambanos, were mocking Jesus. I think that both of them, I think he's got one on his right, one on his left. Some people have tried to reconcile this by having like people on other sides of him too, and he's like surrounded by people being crucified. But I think it's just two guys, one on his right, one on his left, and they're both mocking him. And then what happens is one of these thieves, murderers says, oh, because he looks down and he sees what we read in Luke chapter 23 here, people dividing Jesus's garments. And I think that was the key moment here, is they're casting lots for his clothing. And Jesus is being mocked. And I think this guy on the cross is Jewish, and so I think he knows Psalm 22 very well. And he's thinking back to Psalm 22, which starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it involves David writing about people casting lots for his clothes, and his hands and his feet being pierced, and a crowd of evildoers encircling him and mocking him. And the thief murderer is looking at Jesus and thinking, oh, Psalm 22 is coming to life right before my eyes. Everything David wrote about in a figurative sense, because David's hands weren't really pierced, but he was using that as a metaphor. Like, I feel like my hands are pierced. I feel like I can't do anything, because David's in a cave at the time. David's like, they're casting my lots for they're casting lots for my clothing back at the palace where I'd kept my clothing. Like, now I'm in this cave, and the people back in the palace are dividing up my clothing amongst themselves. David's writing about his experience, but fast forward hundreds of years later, and now the criminal on the cross is looking and seeing this play out. He's seeing Psalm 22 come to life before his eyes in a very literal way that really wasn't for David. So what he's realizing is Jesus, who is called the Son of David. Everybody knows this about Jesus, that he's a descendant of David. The prophecies of a son of David, being a Messiah and being a judge for Israel, are well known by everyone in the Jewish world at this time. So how does Psalm 22 end? It ends with restoration. It ends with the one being mocked actually being in a position now where he has power and authority. Now, David knew the prophecy he knew he was anointed by Samuel as a child. He knew he was going to be king one day. So that's what David is talking about in Psalm 22. He's sitting in that cave, and he's like, things are terrible in this cave. I don't have food. I don't have friends. My life is in danger. And yet, David says at the end of Psalm 22, I'm going to sit on a throne one day. And when I do, the people who are my enemies better watch out. So Jesus is on a cross. But this Jewish criminal, probably a religious man if he's rebelling against Rome. Part of his motivation for rebelling against Rome in the first place may have been his religious zealotry. So he's familiar with the concept of messianic promises. He's familiar with the concept of resurrection of the dead. And it's quite possible that this thief on the cross, as we know him, is the first one who puts two and two together based on Psalm 22. And he says, okay, this man who's dying on the cross right here is coming back from this. And when he does, I don't want to be on his bad side. So when he says, Lord, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. So what he had just done is he rebuked the other criminal. He's like, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And then he looks at Jesus, and this is really, I mean, I don't think we fully appreciate what's going on here. As he looks at Jesus and says, Lord, remember me, he's not just saying, like, let my sins be forgiven so I can go to heaven. What he's saying is, when you come back from this, and I know it doesn't look good right now, but I know you're coming back from this. He's a man of faith who believes in the resurrection of the dead. He says, when you come back from this, I want to be on your good side. Because I know what you're going to do to all your enemies. And I don't want to be considered your enemy. So when he says, Lord, remember me, it's like, remember what I said just now. Remember how I stuck up for you. You know, if this situation is played out sometimes in world history, like people have like figuring out like which ruler do I want to be on his good side or bad side. I mean, we see this in politics all the time. Like, who do I kiss up to, kind of thing. This guy really is kind of like kissing up to Jesus here, but that's good. That's what we want to do. We do want to say good things about Jesus, and then say to Jesus, "Please remember me when you come into your kingdom. Don't kill me." That's really what this is, pleading for mercy here. So he looks at the Romans and he looks at Jesus and he says, whose side do I want to be on when things really play out? And so he says, Jesus, remember me. And then Jesus says these wonderful words of truth and promise. Truly I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. Where do we put the comma there? My goodness. I have a real problem with how this is often talked about. Today you will be with me in paradise. We usually use this as a way to give comfort to people, so I don't want to like take away comfort. But we tend to think of this as a passage where Jesus is saying, like, today you're going to be in heaven. Right when you die, you're going to heaven. I don't think this is what Jesus is saying here. I'm not saying that the man when he dies here doesn't go to heaven, but I don't believe that's what Jesus is saying. I think Jesus is saying, truly I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. So the comma after today, the Greek doesn't have the punctuation. So you have to just put in the comma where it would make sense in English. And I think what Jesus is saying is, truly I say to you today, like in spite of the fact that today things look kind of bad for us, in spite of the fact that I'm up here bleeding and having trouble breathing and in immense excruciating pain, and you are too, by the way, he says to the criminal, despite the fact that things don't look great for us today, you will be with me in paradise. Which I believe Jesus is giving a promise not for that day, but for the resurrection of the dead. I mean, Jesus himself isn't going to rise for a couple of days here. And I believe the comfort Jesus wants us to have ultimately is not our soul going to heaven when we die, but the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. That's paradise. Heaven is a wonderful place. And unless Jesus returns, I look forward to enjoying the glories of heaven. But there's something after that. The paradise. And paradise actually is a Greek word, paradiso, which refers, it has a strong connotation. I mean, not even connotation, it's a denotation. It refers to gardens. A paradiso was, just picture Florida this time of year. It's not here. We don't have a paradiso right now because we don't even have green on our trees. But if you can picture a beautiful garden, that's paradiso. So Jesus is promising the resurrection, because that's when the garden comes back. That's when the Garden of Eden is fully restored. That's when we have a beautiful resurrected material world that we live in our fleshly bodies, glorified bodies, but still resurrected bodies. So that's what Jesus is promising to the criminal, as far as we can tell, as far as I believe. So some background there on a familiar story. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to emphasize to the kids, but let's run through our main points for Sunday school for each week. So first of all, what does the story tell us about who we are as God's people? Well, it tells us that no matter what we have done, and let's not make a mistake, that this guy on the cross here with Jesus is not a hero for what he's done in his life. He is a bad guy. He's a villain. He's done evil, and he rightly says, I deserve to be punished. And yet those who deserve to be punished are the very people Jesus says, I tell you the truth today. you will be with me in paradise. We will live with Jesus. So we are the people who are, despite our sin, despite the evil in our background, we are God's people. The assurance that Jesus gives of forgiveness and grace is ours. What does this story tell us about who we are and or who God is and his tender mercies for us? The story tells us, of course, that God is not going to withhold his own son for our salvation. But also, this story tells us that that God, in his mercy, is giving us the assurance that we need. He gives us the words. We want assurance. Jesus says, or the criminal says to Jesus, "Please remember me." And Jesus gives him specific words. So the objective words God speaks are for our assurance, so that we don't need to doubt our salvation. Of course, he gives us baptism in the Lord's Supper. Famous question. Well, that thief, you didn't get baptized, so you don't need to get baptized, right? Well, he had the direct word from Jesus on the cross, but also he actually died before Jesus instituted baptism in Matthew 28. So, yeah, if you are a disciple of Jesus, you're going to want to get baptized. I know there are some exceedingly rare instances where people may come to deathbed conversions who aren't able to get baptized. Even then, good chance you have an opportunity. All you need is a little bit of water and somebody to speak those words. More regularly, there's children, infants, babies, fetuses who die before they are able to be baptized, and we have comfort and hope from God's word. But for those who are able, baptism is one of those assurances God gives us in his mercies that we are saved. And then finally, how does this tell us how we should live as God's people? The obvious application here is to be forgiving of others. For Jesus says, forgive them. To forgive those who are asking for forgiveness as well. When the criminal says to Jesus, "Lord, please remember me," Jesus doesn't hesitate and gives him that word of grace. So whether they ask for forgiveness or not, we give them forgiveness. But as God's people, we freely dispense the forgiveness we have first been given. That's all for me for this lesson. We'll talk more about Palm Sunday next week. God bless you.